Previously on F1 MyDriver. With the 2015 F1 season approaching, Honda announced it was to return to Formula 1 with McLaren, and in this alternate F1 universe, Honda's return would spell a tremendous success for both them and McLaren, showing up to the pre-season testing with the fastest engine by far and giving McLaren hope to return to the top. Fernando Alonso announced his retirement from Formula 1, however, and so McLaren were forced to promote their junior driver, the F2 champion aarava, to a full-time race seat alongside veteran Jenson Button. This leap of faith would prove to be a golden decision, with aarava going on to battle Kimi Raikkonen for the Drivers' World Championship. Throughout 2015, the battle for the top step of the podium was between McLaren and Ferrari, with Sebastian Vettel and Jenson Button taking early victory. However, soon the tables would turn in favour of their respective teammates, and the season much became a battle between the Iceman and the rookie star in the McLaren. The young Brit took the lead of the championship for the first time halfway through the season after a win at the Monaco Grand Prix, and from then on it was a cat and mouse game for Raikkonen to chase down and close that gap. All of which culminated in a season finale at the Japanese Grand Prix, in which, despite Raikkonen winning the race, saw aarava take home third place and hold on to the lead and win his first World Drivers' Championship in his rookie debut season in Formula 1. 2016 then was on the horizon, and with the winter off period brought much change to Formula 1. McLaren announced they signed back the two-time world champion Lewis Hamilton to partner aarava, but a mere few days later, aarava announced he would be leaving McLaren to join Mercedes on a lucrative 2-year deal, leaving McLaren to draft in their other junior driver, Stoffel Vandoorne, to drive alongside Hamilton. Ultimately, this pairing would still be successful and help steer McLaren to a second consecutive Constructors' title in 2016, with Vandoorne surprisingly thrashing Hamilton with 5 wins to 1 during the season. Mercedes faced a difficult 2015 coming off the back of a rather successful 2014, with their engine development falling behind the others, and decided to also part way with Nico Rosberg to give them a completely fresh start. So alongside aarava, they promoted their junior driver at the time, Pascal Wehrlein, to drive for them in 2016, with the hope of returning to the top with this all-new lineup. aarava managed to win 2 races that season and would be consistent throughout, but unfortunately Vandoorne took the lead of the championship at round 8 and would go on to hold the lead right to the death. Vandoorne would win the Drivers' World Championship by 1 single point over aarava, in doing so creating history of 2 back-to-back rookie world champions in F1. Meanwhile, Kimi Raikkonen had announced his retirement from F1 following his title loss in 2015, which gave way for Nico Rosberg to join his fellow German at Ferrari. It would unfortunately though be a very quiet season for the Scuderia in 2016, with both drivers having terrible form. Red Bull that season had promoted Max Verstappen to its senior team alongside Daniel Ricciardo, and this paved the way for the Frenchman Pierre Gasly to join Toro Rosso alongside Carlos Sainz, a move which would start the Frenchman's journey into the limelight of F1 soon enough. Red Bull had a pretty quiet 2015 and a very slow start to 2016, but Ricciardo would eventually go on to win 3 out of the last 4 races, which served ultimately as a great advertisement, if anything, for his 2017 drive. Because going into the 2017 season then, Ferrari was set to drop Nico Rosberg following his form at the end of 2016, and so the Red faction decided to sign on Daniel Ricciardo to partner Vettel for the 2017 season. Ricciardo would go on to win 2 races that season and be a title contender for the Drivers' World Championship, with Vettel ultimately being left in the same bad form from the previous season. Red Bull promoted Pierre Gasly to replace Ricciardo after a strong rookie year in 2016, and the team would overall be the fastest team over the course of the season, winning 6 out of 15 rounds and taking the Constructors' World Championship. As for the drivers' title, it was a different story unfortunately. Verstappen and Gasly were so equally matched in fact, with 165 and 163 points apiece, but they were equally unlucky and inconsistent, and after being so strong contenders for the title early on, would ultimately only finish 4th and 5th in the standing. Most notably, Verstappen suffered an engine failure in the second last round, which saw him slip from 1st to 4th in the drivers' standings. Red Bull's promotion of Gasly also opened up the door for his friend from F2, Antonio Giovinazzi, to step up to F1 and partner Carlos Sainz, and Giovinazzi would eventually go on to be the season's rising young star. Ahead of the 2017 season, it looked likely that Sauber may go bankrupt and pull out of Formula 1, but Ferrari, looking for a way to develop a junior driver program in the future in Formula 1 with an effective B team, stepped in to buy out the team, and so the new team Scuderia Alfa Romeo was born. They swiftly signed on Nico Hülkenberg to be a senior lead of the team, and stuck to their word and commenced their junior program by sticking Mick Schumacher in the car alongside Hülkenberg. Mercedes and McLaren would stay put with their lineups of Hamilton, Van Dorn and aarava and Wehrlein, but fortunes were set to change for both teams. McLaren had overspent their budget in 2016, helping Van Dorn secure his title, and so were held back for much of 2017. They eventually picked up pace, with Van Dorn winning the last 2 rounds of the season and jumped from 5th to 2nd in the championship ahead of Daniel Ricciardo at the death. Meanwhile, the Mercedes team had hoped to finally crack their slump in car performance since 2014, but instead turned up to 2017 with a bucking Bronco car which performed horribly in low fuel conditions. This meant aarava and Wehrlein would have to constantly drag the car up each Sunday, a test which Wehrlein did not fare too well at. Wehrlein, unfortunately, after poor performances and multiple altercations with his teammate, one of which involved both of them spinning out into last place on lap 1 of the Belgium Grand Prix, he was dropped mid-season to Mana temporarily, and Mercedes even called back Nico Rosberg as a replacement. On the other hand, aarava miraculously won 2 races early on in the season in rounds 2 and 3, and would spend the entire season trying to be consistent as possible to keep in the title fight. And the season would eventually go down to the wire in Japan. In the final qualifying session in intermediate conditions, Gasly, aarava and Ricciardo qualified down the order in P5 to P7 respectively, with Van Dorn on pole. Van Dorn would go on to dominate that Grand Prix and win his 2nd race of the season, with aarava left to fend off Ricciardo for P4 after being overtaken by Giovinazzi, who took home his very first podium of his career. Meanwhile, Red Bull made a fatal error with Gasly, who initially looked like he was good to maybe even take the lead of the championship in the final race, but by placing him on dry tyres when it was clearly time for the switch to intermediates, they blew what looked like a pretty comfortable chance. All of this led to aarava taking home his 2nd World Championship by 4 points after coming so bitterly close in the previous year. And so this wraps up the recap on F1 MyDriver Phase 1. Tune in next time for Phase 2's recap.